Some people loved him, others hated his guts. But whatever your views on President Trump, you need to know about a little understood decision he oversaw in his final year in office. Officially, it was known as Docket 18-295. It has nothing to do with his response to COVID, building the wall, the trade war with China, or anything else you've likely heard about before. Instead, it involves a radical technological change that could ultimately go down as the greatest masterstroke of Trump's 4 years in office. According to the man dubbed the Tech Prophet by Forbes magazine, this single change to the law could generate as much as $15.1 trillion in new wealth over the coming years and create hundreds of ways for regular Americans to grow their wealth. You see, in Trump's final year in office, the federal government invoked its powers to unleash a radical new technology that would soon appear inside every home in America. The last time this happened was 35 years ago, on May 9, 1985, and it led directly to one of the greatest money-making opportunities in American history. It single-handedly unleashed trillions in economic growth, helping create 20 million American jobs and sending at least 6 different stocks up more than 2,000% over the following decades. We never thought we'd get another opportunity like this again. But now, the man widely considered to be America's #1 futurist, a man who worked closely with Reagan, Nixon, and Romney, claims history is repeating itself. According to this technology prophet, if you understand what's happening, Trump's secret legacy could change your life. It'll radically alter everything from how much you pay for energy, how you shop for groceries, how long it takes you to get to work, even how much you pay for healthcare. In the words of one tech insider, a CEO who works closely with Microsoft, Apple, and Google, it will rewrite the rules of what is possible. And if his 3-decade track record in the tech world is anything to go by, taking 5 minutes to hear him out now could be the smartest thing you'll do all year. For over half a century, former U.S. Marine George Gilder has made a career predicting major new technology before it hits the mainstream. Back in the early 1980s, he handed Ronald Reagan an early microchip with the immortal words, "This tiny piece of plastic will transform our world forever." His ability to identify emerging companies could have helped many investors make a fortune. In fact, Forbes magazine documented one of his greatest ever calls, reporting that on April 6, 1998, he identified Amazon as a lifespan extender. If you'd invested $150 on that day, you'd have been sitting on $365,760 by November 4th, 2020. That's a 243,740% gain. He was awarded the White House Award for Entrepreneurial Excellence, and his 19 books over 5 decades have sold more than 1 million copies. His work has been regularly featured in the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and the Harvard Business Review. He predicted the rise of the internet economy way back in the mid-1990s, before most people even had an email address. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt said that he'd been proven absolutely right in his prediction. But if this new prediction is correct, then there's as much as $15.1 trillion at stake today. And it's all thanks to a decision made in President Trump's final year. A decision that could see him go down in history as one of the most influential presidents in our history. And America's tech giants have wasted no time in rushing to deploy this new technology. For instance, Google launched what it called Secret Commercially Valuable Plan in dozens of cities to test this technology, and Apple quietly signed a deal worth $15 billion to try and commercialize it first. Gilder has a long track record of being able to identify these kinds of shifts before they take off. This is why tech prophet George Gilder recently decided to start helping regular Americans understand what's happening once again, why tech insiders are so excited, and to name the stocks he believes you need to own to profit from what's happening. Will some folks make millions this time around? As George recently went on camera to explain, you might want to start thinking bigger.
To understand what's happening, you need to understand a little-known chapter of America's history. On May 9th, 1985, the FCC made a decision that issued a shockwave through America's technology industry. It was known as Docket 81-413. You may never have heard it before. Most people haven't. It's not taught in schools. It's a forgotten part of our country's history. But without it, much of modern technology simply wouldn't exist. Your laptop, tablet, and smartphone wouldn't work. There'd be no video streaming on YouTube. No free video calls to your grandkids on the other side of the country via Skype or Zoom. No apps like Uber, Facebook, or Spotify. It's no exaggeration to say that without Docket 81-413, every tech company you can think of, we're talking Apple's 115,800% 40-year return, Microsoft's 199,590% 34-year total return, Netflix's 18-year 34,340% gain, Uber, Facebook, Google, Samsung, Intel, IBM, none of it would exist. Though most people have never heard of it, I'd say Docket 81-413 has probably generated more wealth for more people than anything else in modern history. It was one of those rare moments that changed the fate of humanity, like the invention of the printing press, the radio, television, antibiotics, fiber optics, or the creation of the first microprocessor. These seminal moments don't come along often, but when they do, everything changes. What made it so lucrative? Put simply, it opened up a new way for computers, machines, and other devices to connect with each other. See, for most of the 20th century, the federal government maintained a tightly controlled monopoly on what it considered the natural resources of the radio wave spectrum. The simplest way to understand the spectrum is to imagine a car radio. Every station owns its own frequency on the spectrum. You just twist a dial to navigate from one to another. This is exactly how it works at scale, except it's not just radio, it's whole industries. Radio stations do get one part of it, but TV stations, cell phone operators, energy companies, the military, NASA, and other government agencies control huge bands of it. This is big business. According to Politico, the prices for different slices of the spectrum, quote, have become dizzying. A 2015 auction of several slices of federally controlled airwaves raised nearly $45 billion. For decades, the government claimed it needed to be tightly regulated by the state. What the government was doing was effectively taking control over the communications industry, deciding who would be allowed to use the air and who would be barred from the air, picking winners and losers. The winners, a few big telephone companies. The losers, American inventors of new spectrum devices. To people who think the government should be involved directing the economy, seems a great idea. To the rest of us, it's about as dumb an idea as you'll ever hear about. Why? The same reason most monopolies are dumb. They stifle competition, innovation, and free enterprise. But for most of the 20th century, no one challenged the government monopoly on airwaves until one man decided to fight the government from the inside. His name was Michael Marcus. And though you've likely never heard of him before, he should go down in history as a champion of American capitalism. Marcus wanted to see what would happen when the government released its grip on at least part of the spectrum. He believed the spectrum was so valuable that, at least in part, deserved to be open to use by entrepreneurs. At first, it seemed like a doomed effort. Marcus himself said that his work was, quote, threatening to many people, both inside and outside the FCC. Of course it was. It threatened to let real competition break out. But Marcus kept at it, and eventually he won. Docket 81-413 was that victory. It was the moment the federal government opened a tiny sliver of the spectrum up to free enterprise. It took a tiny fraction, 2.4 gigahertz to be exact, out from its tightly controlled monopoly and allowed unlicensed use of it. In plain English, that means it allowed open source innovation on one part of the spectrum. No one owned it, anyone could use it. Marcus actually paid a steep personal price for that victory. As he said, unfortunately, the internal FCC response to May 1985 decision was not positive. As a result, there was a major reorganization of my office that seemed engineered to displace me, and within 6 months of the decision, I was transferred. Yet, Marcus was on the right side of history, because what happened next changed the world forever. How so? Because Docket 81-413 allowed creative new tech firms to innovate on the spectrum for wireless communications. In that instant, the modern world was born. When you log onto the internet using your home router, you're using unlicensed spectrum. When you stream a video to your smartphone, you're using the unlicensed spectrum. When you download or use an app, you're using unlicensed spectrum. Even a baby monitor or a remote-controlled garage door, they all use the tiny sliver of spectrum that Docket 81-413 opened up. It's almost impossible to put a dollar amount on just how valuable that decision was. It's like trying to value the whole internet. The scale is so mind-boggling, so vast, that it's hard to be precise at all. But for a sense of the value, just consider the industries that I think simply wouldn't have existed without Docket 81-413. The Wi-Fi industry, that's worth $1.96 trillion. That was in 2018. The smartphone industry, that was $522 billion in 2018. The tablet industry, another $258 billion per year. The app economy, that's estimated to be worth $6.3 trillion next year. And the whole Bluetooth industry, that's unlicensed too, worth $4.5 billion. In other words, if you take these industry figures and forecasts, the unlicensed spectrum generates roughly $9 trillion of value. It's impossible to say how many trillions of dollars those industries have created since 1985, and none of it would be possible without Docket 81-413. It helped usher in an incredible era of experimentation, innovation, invention on the unlicensed part of the spectrum, as this chart shows. Again, I predicted this. In my best-selling book, Telecosm, which was published before the first iPhones and tablets even existed, I told my readers that the spectrum would form the core of virtually every significant modern technology: power cords and telephones, Pentium PCs, cellular phones, and fiber optic cables. Today, most of world business, in one way or another, is pursuing the pot of gold at the end of what I call Maxwell's rainbow. And that was right. That's exactly what happened. Put simply, if you've understood just how valuable that decision would be back then, as I pretty much did, you could have put yourself on the right side of one of the greatest wealth-creating trends in American history. One story I heard, a doctor called Rosario Maiolino, shows just how lucrative Docket 81-413 was. He did something most people don't. He risked his entire life savings in a company at the heart of the new wireless industry. Then, as wireless technology brought the internet to the masses, that stock took off. In a single year, it rose 2,619%. In just 2 years, the good Dr. Rosario, he turned his $325,000 stake into $17 million. It was enough to retire a full 2 decades before most people. It was like a fairy tale come true, he said. As CNN put it, the stock involved was one of the greatest get-rich-quick stocks of our era. Now, of course, this was a highly risky move. Risking such a big portion of his life savings was something very few people would feel comfortable doing. And in this case, Rosario even got his timing exactly right. But docket 81-413 sent more than one stock to the moon. Here are some of the most exceptional examples of peak gains I've found. There was Logitech, one of the first companies to create a wireless mouse for your computer. Since its 1997 IPO, it's made investors roughly 35 times their money. Motorola was another early player. It jumped as high as 20 times in the next 15 years. So was Nokia. In 12 years, between the mid-90s and mid-2000s, you could have made 20 times your stake on Nokia stock. And those were just the first wave of winners. The companies that directly used the unlicensed spectrum. The wider implications of this unlicensed revolution were even greater, though. Just think about the number of businesses that only exist today because of the wireless internet. Would Netflix be up 34,340% since 2000 without video streaming? Would Cisco be up more than 500 times since its IPO in 1990 without Wi-Fi? Would Microsoft, Google, Amazon, IBM, Intel, or any of America's wealth-creating machines exist without unlicensed wireless internet? They wouldn't exist in anything like their current form. You can trace the success of every single one of those stocks back to a little-known FCC decision that very few people, even today, understand at all. And here's the good news. You're about to get a second chance, but only if you're quick, and only if you make the handful of moves I'm going to lay out for you in the next few minutes. You now understand that docket 81-413 was a seminal event in American history. Moments like that don't come around very often. But one occurred very recently, on July 27th, 2020. On that day, the FCC opened up new bands of unlicensed spectrum, one that's 4 times bigger than the spectrum liberated in 1985. This time around, it's known as docket 18-295. And though it's not the sort of thing that makes front page news, it has caught the attention of the technology world. Facebook's director of wireless has, quote, called it clearly one of the most important wireless announcements in a long time. The chip company Broadcom's vice president of marketing said it's, quote, a definitive moment in U.S. wireless history, the most substantive decision any commission has made on unlicensed spectrum in almost 25 years. Intel has called it, quote, the most significant contribution to Wi-Fi in nearly 20 years. Apple said it sets the course for the next generation of Wi-Fi networks. It's easy to see why. The FCC's recent decision opens up a vast amount of bandwidth from government control. In fact, the 2.4 gigahertz band that the FCC opened up in 1985 had just 70 megahertz worth of bandwidth, more than 4 times the spectrum that was opened up in that early revolutionary decision. This is a game changer, and that's where the technology hidden inside this device comes in. Inside is a computer chip that was built within a month of the FCC's decision. And it allows new technology to access and share the 6 gigahertz part of the spectrum for the first time. If history is any guide, this may well prove to be the single most valuable technology of the 21st century. So much so that all the major tech firms in America are backing it. Just take a look at the companies that have joined together as part of an alliance behind it. To be clear, of course, these companies are usually direct competitors. But in this one instance, they've teamed up. And those giant companies are just the tip of the iceberg. Also part of this alliance are British Telecom, AT&T, Bose, Amazon, Facebook, Foxconn, General Motors, Fujitsu, Google, HP, even IKEA, Logitech, Motorola, SoftBank, T-Mobile, Boeing, Toshiba. I could go on and on. But the list runs to nearly 800 major multinational corporations. And they all backed this move, every single one of them. In other words, hundreds of these multi-billion-dollar companies are rushing to use the new bandwidth the FCC just unlocked. In fact, it's going to be a stampede in the end. First, you'll likely see new routers that are Wi-Fi 6E enabled. These are going to appear everywhere. According to one tech analyst, these connections could prove to be significantly faster than even the best that 5G has to offer. Suddenly, light-speed internet will be everywhere. It won't be just your home. It'll be offices, stadiums, train stations, malls, everywhere. That's because there's now enough bandwidth for thousands of devices to share a connection in one place. One analyst put it, if you're sitting in a packed stadium with 70,000 other people, the arrival of Wi-Fi 6E means you're not going to be competing for bandwidth in the same way you used to. It will be significantly easier to stream the event to friends, order concessions via an app, or even find out which bathroom has the shortest lines. So this will kickstart a technology arms race to dominate this market. In the next 6 months, every tech firm in the world will race to get to market first. By Christmas, you'll see a wave of new smartphones, laptops, tablets, and other devices from Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Broadcom. Intel's chips will be ready in January 2021. Remember, there are more than 800 tech firms that lobbied for new spectrum to open up. That means there are going to be literally hundreds and globally potentially thousands of companies seeking to use the new unlicensed spectrum. And that's going to create one of the greatest money-making opportunities of your lifetime. So how do you position yourself to stand a shot at profiting? Now listen very carefully to what I'm about to share with you. 2 words, just 2 words hold the secret to making a killing from this. Understand them and what they mean for you, your family, and the rest of America. And there's a possible $15 trillion windfall on the table. But without these 2 words, you may be lost. To explain why, I want you to imagine you're in a busy public place, a mall, office, or train station. You take out your phone, your laptop or tablet, and search for a Wi-Fi connection. Chances are you'll pick up 10, 20, even 100 different connections. Every single one is operating on exactly the same part of the spectrum. None of those devices own their band of the spectrum like a radio station. They all share the same frequency. And that's the secret to profiting from what's going on here. The critical technology no longer focuses on owning a part of the spectrum, like radio stations and TV channels do. This is spectrum sharing. Remember those two words, spectrum sharing. They're the key to everything. Your phone or router can't simply tune in to the newly opened spectrum. To access this new virgin territory, it needs special technology. The companies that make spectrum sharing possible could be the gatekeepers of this entire new industry. They're the ones that make everything else possible. History shows that these firms were some of the best performing stocks in the world the last time this happened. For instance, I recommended one of the world's leading spectrum sharing tech firms in 1996. I issued a sell recommendation 4 years later for a 4,234% gain. That's 40 times your money. It's one of my greatest ever picks. And correct calls like that made a lot of regular folks like you a hell of a lot of money. Some of them are still talking about it today. Just look. Now, I don't know how much Bruce and Dave invested or exactly how long they held the stocks I recommended, but two things are certain. First, they still, to this day, credit me with helping them to make a fortune. And second, right now, history is repeating itself. Now, of course, I don't have a crystal ball, and past performance isn't indicative of future success. But see, this new unlicensed band opens up virgin territory in the spectrum. Vast horizons of bandwidth that have been locked away by the state now suddenly is open to everybody. That means demand to use this spectrum is likely to go vertical. And that's why you'll see every one of these devices in virtually every house in America. So how much money are we talking about? $15 trillion is an estimate you can try on for size. I've run the numbers. There are a whole raft of new industries being propelled forward by this newly unlicensed spectrum. In short, just as the FCC's 1985 decision paved the way for wireless, Bluetooth, smartphones, apps, tablets, so this year's historic decision is set to create a series of new industries. Here's how I think it's going to play out. First, this FCC decision is expected to enable about $180 billion for the American economy in the next 5 years. That number comes from Columbia University's Dr. Raoul Katz. Lightning-fast new broadband networks will create at least $106 billion. Another $69 billion in new sales from technology companies. But that's just the first order impact of what's coming. The second order consequences, which very few people ever see coming ahead of time, will surely be much more lucrative. It's going to send the connected devices market into overdrive, creating, conservatively, $1.5 trillion in new American wealth by 2030. The biggest trend of the 1990s was the rise of personal computing as millions of people began connecting via the internet. And now we're on the cusp of a bigger change, a shift that will bring billions of devices online starting next year, thanks to the enormous amounts of extra bandwidth in the unlicensed spectrum. A staggering 30 billion new devices will access the internet in the next 2 years. That's according to McKinsey data. They've been studying that. That will start with things we're already familiar with: new phones, cameras, TVs, laptops, security cameras, and all those things. But it won't end there. We'll see a wave of wearables like health sensors, smart clothing, and other new health devices. Going beyond that, we'll have smart rings. They've already begun to come onto the market, providing real-time health data, measuring anything from core body temperature to heart rate. The NBA has now already partnered with Oura Ring to provide all players with its sleep tracking technology. Some of these devices even connect to your bank account as a new form of biometric payment system. Not only that, according to some experts, we could see thousands of new nano devices using sensors that may be only a few atoms thick. But those devices will communicate more seamlessly than you'd ever think possible. That's because of something called multi-user, multiple input, multiple output. In short, right now, devices have to queue to access your router. So when it's busy, everything slows down, just like hundreds of cars on a single-lane highway. But no longer. The extra unlicensed bandwidth is like an 8-lane highway with multiple devices all communicating simultaneously. As the head of the Wi-Fi Alliance, which includes Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, and Intel, put it, it's as if we have been raised in the bicycle era, and now we will get proper freeways. Analysts Fortune Business Insights forecast that the connected devices market will grow by more than 5-fold in the next 7 years. Then you have the rise of the smart home, which is expected to be worth $246 billion in just a few years' time. You may have heard of the smart home before, but so much bandwidth will allow smart everything. Everything will connect to the internet via the unlicensed spectrum, from your thermostat to your refrigerator. For proof of just how valuable this market will soon be, you only need to look at what Apple, Amazon, Samsung, and Google have been doing recently. At the end of 2019, they teamed up to create a shared open source, quote, smart home protocol, meaning all their home devices will soon be compatible with one another. Siri, Google Home, Alexa, it won't matter. It all works seamlessly with one another. In other words, America's biggest tech firms are joining forces in order to dominate the smart home market liftoff they know is just around the corner. Then you have telemedicine. Goldman Sachs says this will be worth $300 billion. This is another trend that has gone ballistic since the pandemic. A few years ago, the idea of a video call with your doctor would have seemed sort of absurd. Not so anymore. Now, access to remote health care is taken off in a big way. In fact, a new report by independent analyst Frost and Sullivan forecasts a tsunami of growth this year, with the market rising by more than 60% in 2020 alone, and 7-fold over the next 5 years. But 2 new government announcements recently poured further rocket fuel on this market. In March 2020, the U.S. Center for Medicare announced that telemedicine now qualifies at the same reimbursement rate as in-person visits. This pushes doctors to hold more online consultations. And the FDA expanded its approved use list to include remote medical diagnostic devices. Many of these devices will be wireless enabled. And I'll bet every last cent I have, they'll all use the unlicensed band. That's the ISM, Industrial Scientific Medical. Then you get to what has been described as the biggest money-making opportunity of all. That's the 13.2 trillion 5G market. According to the Financial Times, 5G is a game changer for humanity. According to MIT Technology Review, it's a technological paradigm shift akin to the shift from the typewriter to the computer. And another industry study predicts unleashing of a wave of new wealth worth 13.2 trillion globally by 2035. It's free air, not regulated air, that's really critical to this money-making opportunity. What most people don't realize is 5G traffic will mostly run through the same unlicensed spectrum at 6 gigahertz and above. It'll share that bandwidth with your Wi-Fi and 100 other devices. In fact, I predict that just as 80% of phone calls now end up over Wi-Fi, unlicensed spectrum, instead of over your cell operator's licensed frequency, we'll see exactly the same thing happening with 5G. You add all those industry forecasts up, and you get about $15.1 trillion of new value. Will it create exactly $15.1 trillion in new wealth? Nah, I couldn't say for sure. It could be less, it could be a lot more. That's the nature of something this big. These are best guess estimates from industry insiders. But be in no doubt about one thing. There are trillions of dollars at stake here, make no mistake. And to be clear, none of it will be possible without spectrum sharing technology. By the way, those numbers only include what we can reliably forecast will happen because tech firms have disclosed their plans to the markets. But behind closed doors, there are signs that these same companies are gearing up to use the spectrum in ways we couldn't even imagine yet. For instance, Google recently filed reports relating to, this is a direct quote, a secret commercially valuable plan, unquote, involving the 6 gigahertz spectrum. Whatever it is, it's being tested right now in 17 different states, including California, Virginia, Florida, Iowa, and Kansas. Then you have Apple's recent $15 billion deal for, quote, specific high-performance wireless components. Exactly what these components are is unclear, but rumor has it Apple will move into augmented reality markets in the near future. For virtual and augmented reality to exist, it either needs a fiber connection to the internet or huge amounts of bandwidth. Just as phones, computers, and so many other devices have gone wireless since 1985, this will likely happen to AR as well. Mark my words, this is coming, and the market is forecast to double roughly every 2 years starting this year. Then you have Amazon's plan to launch 3,200 satellites in coming years. These are designed to provide broadband to thousands of square miles of the U.S. and the rest of the world. These satellites will operate in licensed spectrum while they're in the air, but those signals could easily be relayed by Amazon Wi-Fi. That final point isn't so far-fetched as it might seem. With so much extra bandwidth available, Amazon, Google, and the other giants could be planning an audacious takeover and takedown of the existing cell, cable, and telecommunications networks. But it's more likely than you might think. I told you earlier that some of the biggest companies, including Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, lobbied for more unlicensed spectrum. What I didn't tell you was that existing telecom firms fought them tooth and claw. For example, AT&T led the counter lobby to keep the government monopoly on spectrum in place. They were joined by other old economy organizations like the Edison Electric Institute and the American Petroleum Institute. Why do you think that was? Because they were scared. Scared that, like so many old industries, they're going to be disrupted, outcompeted, and replaced by new technology. Mark my words, we're on the cusp of one of the biggest shifts the tech world has seen since the mid-1980s. I've shown you why that is today. The last time this happened, it unleashed an estimated $9 trillion windfall. And now, at last, history is repeating itself. And that presents you with an opportunity. Depending on your circumstances, how much you're comfortable investing, it could be a life-changing opportunity. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. Hang around, and you might have to wait another 35 years for an opportunity like this one. Do you have another 3.5 decades for another shot like this? I don't, I'll tell you that. Keep in mind, this wouldn't be the first time I've helped everyday Americans make a killing from emerging technology. See, over the last 4 decades or so, I've been able to anticipate some of the world's most important innovations. And it's likely why Forbes magazine had this to say about me. Gilder is pure technology. The key to Gilder's success is no mystery. He digs like a dog to learn his subjects. Or why Microsoft founder and 4th richest man in the world, Bill Gates, had this to say about me. Gilder is very stimulating even when I disagree with him, and most of the time I agree with him. Or why Rush Limbaugh had this to say of me. It would behoove you to study everything you can get your hands on by George Gilder. That's me. A true American genius, he said. In many ways, I've been tracking this story my whole professional life. That's also why one of America's great media moguls, Steve Forbes, had this to say about me. Few men or women in modern times have been so consistently farsighted in fathoming the future of high technology as George Gilder's been. Or why the New York Times called my book Wealth and Poverty a hymn to getting rich. So let me be really blunt and lay out just how big this opportunity is. The last time anything like this happened was 1985, and it led directly to the creation of the modern technological world. It single-handedly created scores of multi-billion-dollar industries, including Wi-Fi, smartphones, apps, tablets, and it sent hundreds of stocks soaring. And now history is repeating itself. It's that simple. The question is, are you in or out? Good. This is where the rubber meets the road. Let's talk stocks. You see, right now, you have a small window of time to position your money in the stocks set to soar as a result of this new unlicensed spectrum. According to Forbes magazine, you'll see new devices able to operate in the 6 gigahertz band by holiday season. Chances are you'll see new routers designed specifically to work in the new part of the spectrum. Netgear, Linksys are already developing hardware, and Intel says it'll have chips ready for January 2021. That gives you, at the outside, a few weeks before this story breaks out into the open. But don't think you can wait around till then to make your move. You see, I've discovered that the computer chips required to tap into this new 6 gigahertz band are already available on the market right now. I'm betting they're actually inside new Wi-Fi 6E routers already. And they're made by a company that already supplies high-end computer chips to some of the biggest companies in the world. I'm talking about, again, Apple, Comcast, Google, Microsoft, Motorola, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, Ford Motors, Tesla. In other words, despite the fact that the 6 gigahertz band was only legally opened in late July, The world's most powerful companies already have access to the technology needed to use it. That means you're likely going to see a wave of new tablets, new smartphones, laptops, desktops, routers, and other devices all hit the market later this year and early next, all thanks to the newly open spectrum. That's why my team of researchers and I have been scouring the market for the very best ways of playing what's happening. We put hundreds of man-hours in and pinpointed the 3 stocks anybody who wants to profit from this needs to own immediately. Because that's the critical point, isn't it? It's one thing to understand what's happening, and now you do. But if you don't position yourself to profit from what's happening, that knowledge is wasted in a way. That's why I'd urge you to grab a copy of a research report my team and I just put together. It's called 3 Spectrum Millionaire Makers. And in it, you'll discover 3 stocks that you absolutely must buy today if you want the chance to profit from the unlicensed spectrum. It contains a full write-up on 3 specific businesses that I strongly recommend you consider. I just told you about the first company. It's easily the world's #1 spectrum sharing technology firm. It had chipsets built within a month of the government even legalizing the 6 gigahertz band. It supplies Apple, Google, Microsoft, trillion-dollar companies, and scores of others. If firms want to roll new devices out, they'll need this company's technology. The second stock you'll hear about is going to be central to bringing this new technology right into your home. It already supplies close to 58 million homes and businesses across America. This network is already growing at an exponential rate, doubling roughly every 18 to 24 months. As Wi-Fi 6E rolls out across America, it's this company that will likely be on the front lines. Chances are this company could soon be installing its technology in your neighborhood or even in your home. The third stock you'll hear about just made one of the smartest acquisitions in its history. It now supplies 9 of the world's top 10 global internet network operators and all the top 6 internet content providers. I've known one of the founders of this company for more than 2 decades, so this company has been on my radar for a while. And now is the time to make your move. All 3 of these stocks are named in my report, 3 Spectrum Millionaire Makers. I'd urge you to grab yourself a copy today. Is this opportunity risk-free? No, nothing in the stock market is risk-free. Investing in new technology, and in particular smaller, more volatile companies like some of those I just mentioned, is no different. Actually, scratch that. Nothing in life is risk-free. Anything we choose to do involves some level of risk. My advice is have your eyes open and only invest capital you're prepared to risk. There's no reason to take a single backward step. I know this firsthand. As I told you earlier, I was the first person to explain to President Reagan how important the microprocessor was going to be, all the way back in the 1980s. And I can tell you, opportunities like this come along very rarely. When they do, you have to take them. If you don't, you often end up regretting it forever. Nothing stings like a missed opportunity. That's why my team of researchers and I have been scouring the market for the very best ways of playing this huge opportunity. And there's a simple way you can get yourself a copy of this report today. In fact, if you stick with me for a couple minutes, you can get your own copy of that report alongside a whole series of special bonuses. I'd also like to send you a copy of my latest book. That book is a hardback copy of Life After Google. That's my 18th book. In this book, you'll discover the emerging technology that could destroy many of today's companies, including some of the biggest, and create brand new ones in their place. This book took the better part of a decade to research and write and led me to meet personally with some of America's most important entrepreneurs and technologists. For instance, I talked with Vitalik Buterin, the founder of the crypto firm Ethereum. We discussed how this new crypto architecture might eliminate lawyers, accountants, and bankers, at least the ones who fail to get on board before it's too late. We also talked about how Uber, the multi-billion-dollar company that displaced taxi drivers, could itself get disrupted in this new future by a company called Swarm. I also worked with Jules Erbach, and he's collaborated with NVIDIA, the microchip company that could play an enormous role in shaping the new horizon. I went further afield, too, meeting with Austin Russell, whose company is radically remaking the hardware for self-driving cars. I sat down with Bob Mercer, who's a key figure in what's probably been the most successful investment fund in America for the last 2 decades. Life After Google was a major commercial success. Check on Amazon and you'll find hundreds of 5-star reviews and a price tag of more than $15. But today you can learn how to get a copy. I'll even pay shipping for you. Just let me know where to send it and you'll discover insights like why AI, driverless cars, and robots that take jobs are not headed where Google, Tesla, and Uber want you to think. According to everything I can find, the Valley is dead wrong about this technology. I'll show you why on page 113. How one radical shift could shake our $5.1 trillion currency market to its very core. Take a look at page 155 to see how everything you know about money could change, from how you get paid to how you buy stuff online to how you save for retirement. You'll read about an investment that's averaged annual 40% returns over the last 20 years. That's good enough that you could double your money every 2 years. You'll see details of that on page 83. You'll also read about how to get in early on over a dozen more radical companies. There are thousands lining up to play a role right now that could lead this coming revolution. I doubt you've heard of a single one, but you can find out more starting on page 199. Before I show you how to take advantage and claim your copy, there's something else. I'd also like to include something you can't get at any bookstore, online or off. I call it Life After Google, the missing chapter. This is a special bonus chapter that's not in any online or print edition. In this extra chapter, you'll discover where to find the modern-day equivalent of buying America in 1970 or even 1870 with all the wealth opportunities that even your great-grandparents couldn't imagine. A company rapidly moving toward world domination that's making strides Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple can only dream of. And I doubt you've ever heard of it. How to grab a stake in all the world's most exciting technologies in just one stock, including self-driving cars, AI, smart devices, social media, the blockchain, mobile gaming, and more. The single biggest secret behind my decades of technology investing success and why it's pointing right now to shares of one of the world's most important technology companies. I name the ticker symbol of this company in this missing chapter. In just a moment, I'll show you how both this extra chapter and your full hardback edition of Life After Google can be yours to keep at no extra charge. See, all 3 of these bonuses, my latest report, 3 Spectrum Millionaire Makers, Life After Google, and Life After Google, the missing chapter, all 3 come free when you take a trial to my monthly newsletter, The George Gilder Report. This is, to put it very simply, the culmination of my professional life's work. As you've seen today, I've been researching, analyzing, and investing in technology for decades. But there has never been a more critical time to understand how emerging technology will change the world than right now. Whatever your views on the pandemic, there's no doubt it has accelerated the trends that were already rapidly reshaping America. The shift from real-world economy to digital economy has gone into overdrive. On one hand, thousands of businesses have gone under, including JCPenney, J.Crew, Hertz, Cirque du Soleil, and CEC Entertainment, owner of Chuck E. Cheese. In a single month in April, 20.8 million Americans lost their jobs. While technology firms have soared out of the crisis. In just one quarter, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google generated $28.6 billion in profits. Tesla's stock is up 700% since its March lows. Please understand, these trends are not going to reverse themselves. If anything, they'll accelerate over the years. We're living through a critical moment in history, one that you simply cannot afford to get wrong. And the newly unlicensed spectrum, opened up just months ago, is right at the heart of what's happening. Consider, as the pandemic hit, internet traffic spiked by 30%. The working from home trend hit warp speed. But it's a bigger shift than that. It'll be the moment historians look back on as the inflection point when the digital economy replaced the real-world economy for good. That means internet and data use is going to continue to increase. Vast numbers of new devices are going to connect to the internet, reshaping trillion-dollar industries of today and creating entirely new ones that don't even exist yet. Put simply, if you don't understand how technology is changing the world today, you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of that change. And right now, technology is changing the world faster than ever. People have a right to be worried they'll get caught on the wrong side. Call it what you want. Left out, left behind, left in the dark. How you describe it isn't important. The important thing is to make sure it doesn't happen to you and your family. That's why I recently created the George Gilder Report. If you want to understand the tech world, anticipate how it'll change your life, and profit from that change, then you should make the George Gilder Report a part of your weekly reading. And there's a very simple way you can do exactly that. So here's what I propose. I'd like to introduce you to my publisher to remind you of all the reports I've told you about and sum up all the details.
Hi there, I'm Doug Hill. I'm George's publisher here at Three Founders Publishing. I'd like to take a moment to remind you of everything you'll get when you sign up for the George Gilder Report. I'd like to send you every report George has told you about, including the George Gilder Report. If you want to learn how to make money from technology, there's no better way of getting a head start on the rest of the market than to read his work on a regular basis. George explains the technology that could reshape the world in the near future and shows you his research and analysis on the stocks he thinks are profitable. 3 Spectrum Millionaire Makers Report. George names the 3 stocks he believes are set to profit from the new unlicensed spectrum. Remember, the last time this happened, it took just 2 months to create one of America's greatest ever stock opportunities. You also get a free hardback copy of Life After Google. Countless people have read this book, many of them paying more than $15 to do so. You can get your own hardback copy free with this offer. And finally, Life After Google, the missing chapter. This isn't available at any price anywhere else. It's reserved entirely for readers of our monthly newsletter. In it, George goes into detail on the biggest stock opportunity around today in a way he simply couldn't do in a hardback book. In addition to these, I'm going to give you immediate access to these 3 bonuses. Bonus number 1, the truth about artificial intelligence. The tech elite say AI will take over the world. UBS says it could be a $180 billion industry. What's the smart money saying? In this special report, find out why most of the experts you're hearing from about AI are dead wrong about where it's headed. Money will be made, but not the way they're telling you. Bonus number 2 is our robot future. Driverless cars, automated factories and homes that run themselves, these are all outcomes of a convergence between the Internet of Things and modern robotics and other automation technology. According to UBS, more than 70% of companies could have automated their businesses. Will your job be safe? What's the best way to invest to stay ahead of the curve? It's all answered in this report. Bonus number 3, the true 5G revolution. You've heard the hype about 5G, but maybe you don't even know what it is. In this report, get a full explanation of what it really means, how far it will spread, and the handful of stocks that could allow you to make big gains on 5G as it rolls out over the months ahead. Bonus number 4, immediate access to Gilder 360. Simply put, I've come up with as a publisher's bonus, it's your chance to hear from George in person anytime he's speaking at a conference. He's been a featured speaker many times over the years. He's even commanded a $100,000 fee for a single speech. I'll see to it you get an early bird invitation to his next important event, wherever it takes place, with a discount whenever I can arrange it. Bonus number 5, ask George almost anything. Every quarter, I'll arrange for George to do a special check-in with the Gilder Report readers. You'll send in your most pressing questions to my team, and we'll all log into a private online webinar where you'll get to listen in as George answers as many as possible. Of course, George can't offer you any personalized investment advice, but you'll still get the chance to add your most pressing questions about the future to our questions list. I'd like you to take 6 months to review everything I just covered. Take a good look, kick the tires. If you don't like what you see, no problem. I'll issue you a full prompt refund and you can keep everything we've sent you. And it gets better for you. See, the regular yearly price for the George Gilder Report is $199. But today, you can get everything I just told you about, plus the next 12 issues of George's newsletter without paying anything close to that. Now, why would I offer you a discount? Well, that's simple. I believe George's work is extremely valuable. I think it'll make you money. And I know that if you listen and get in on this opportunity, then he'll likely have a reader for life. I don't want price to get in the way of that, so I'll steeply discount your subscription price. I think that's a great value, but ultimately, it's what you think that counts. It's entirely your call whether you give this a go or not. But here's how I'd look at it. George has been writing about, studying, researching, and helping people make money from new technology for more than 3 decades. In that time, a lot of people have tried to imitate him. You've probably experienced this yourself. There are hundreds of newsletters out there, all promising to make you rich from new technology. Some are good, others less so. So how do you choose who to listen to? Look, you're a grown-up. I'm not going to tell you what to think. But if you're going to risk your hard-earned money in the stock market, I would encourage you to be sure you're hearing from people who have the right credentials. And quite simply, that's George. So when you hear from the competition, ask yourself, have they been in the market for at least 2 decades? Tech stocks have been on a tear for a decade or more. The last major tech bust was in 2001. Anyone who hasn't invested through a bear market isn't worth listening to. You learn a lot more about yourself when times get hard. George has been writing, researching, and advising presidents on technology since the late 1970s. Is their work internationally recognized? A lot of folks like to make themselves sound important, but does anyone else read their work? George's research has appeared in Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and countless other journals. Do they have connections to key tech insiders? This is crucial. You don't want to hear from a keyboard warrior in his basement. You want real-world intelligence that can make you money. George's network has reached far and wide, including everyone from the leaders of Google, PayPal billionaire Peter Thiel, to giants like Bill Gates and the late Steve Jobs, Presidents Nixon and Reagan, and Henry Kissinger. And finally, have they got a real track record of making people like you money? That's the crucial question. If they don't, ignore them. George made people so much money in the 1990s, they're still talking about it today. So I'm going to be blunt. I don't think anyone else there can match George's experience, his connections, his track record, or his expertise. But really, it's not my opinion that counts, it's yours. Only you can decide whether George's work will be as valuable to you as it has been to so many others. But that's what makes this offer valuable. Yes, you can make a big savings on your first year of the George Gilder Report and access a whole series of bonuses right away. But you'll also get 6 months to review everything and make up your own mind. That puts you 100% in control of what happens next. Maybe you missed out the last time something like this happened. This is your second shot. But the way I see it, you have two choices. You could walk away now and never see how much money you could have made. Or, considering you can try George's work for the next 6 months and walk away if you like, you could put him to the test. Try the George Gilder Report and then make your decision. When you boil it down, opportunities like this come down to one thing. Are you the type who can see what few others can, who sides with the visionaries, who move early, people like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk, who move decisively and move early? Or do you prefer to wait and see, to wait until something's a sure thing before you act? Because the truth is, there is no such thing as a sure thing. Not in the tech world anyway. And waiting until everyone can see how big a technology is going to be means you'll likely never make the kind of gains we've been discussing today. The fact you're listening to me now tells me you're probably in the first camp. You're willing to be bold, take a risk, and get in at the same time as other visionaries. So just remember, the last time this happened was 1985, and some folks made a fortune. You could have made as much as 4,234% on one stock over 4 years, but only if you've moved early. Now, history is repeating itself. We just saw a seminal moment in the tech world, one that will almost certainly send shockwaves through trillion-dollar industries and create opportunities for investors to make a fortune. Within the next several years, this technology will be everywhere. I bet every router, smartphone, tablet, laptop, and other device will use it. It'll be in your home, your pocket, your office, potentially your car, and a million other places. It's coming, whether you invest or not. Right now is your chance to position yourself to profit from what's happening. Join us, and George will send you all the research and analysis he thinks you need. But I can only do so much. I've laid everything out. Now, it's up to you. Given everything I've shown you, I can't think of a single good reason why you wouldn't join us today. You'll get George's research immediately. You can walk away with a full refund anytime in the first 6 months and still keep all the reports you've received. Opportunities like this don't come along often, and when they do, you must grab them with 2 hands. I've done everything I can for you, but I can only do so much. Now it's over to you. You have to act to grasp this opportunity. Do that by clicking on the link below this video and entering your details on our secure order form.